we've discovered millions of pounds in rent secretly flowing from charities into Charles and now William's pocket.
Welcome to WatchMojoUK, and today we're looking at laws we can't believe the royal family still enforce, or laws they enforce but shockingly don't have to follow themselves.
Charles even earns £300 a year from a pipe adjoining a sewage works that discharges effluent into the dock.
Before we begin, we publish new content every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.
Freedom of Information Act exemption.
The expenses revelations may have been unwelcome to MPs, but they were the result of a piece of legislation MPs themselves voted for. Oh yes, the Freedom of Information Act.
Far from a terrible law, the Freedom of Information Act has been a boon to the British public and journalists. In 2000, the Act was passed under Tony Blair's administration, though it was controversial at the time.
Imagine this front door, May 97. A new Prime Minister's gone in, promising more open government. A few months later, the man he tasked with that comes up with this.
The implementation of such an act was a manifesto pledge in the 1997 election, but MPs desperately tried, and failed, to make it so that they were exempt from the Act when it was passed.
What I was seeing when I had my cabinet committees was that there was a coordinated, coherent opposition to what I was trying to do.
It was because of this act that the MPs' expenses scandal came to light. But while MPs weren't spared, the royal family were.
George Pascoe Watson, Freedom of Information Bill, has it been a good thing?
It's been an enormous thing. It's had a gigantic effect on the British political scene.
Specifically, the communications of the sovereign, the heir to the throne, and the second in line to the throne can never be released because of an FOI request, while other less senior members can have their communications released if the public interest is deemed sufficient.
Do you feel that you were pushed out of the job because you were being too radical?
I certainly think I made enemies.
This doesn't prevent the king from releasing his correspondence if he chooses, but the king has already caused scandal because of his private letters. As Prince of Wales, he was subject to an FOI request that released what's called the Black Spider memos, perceived by many to be an attempt to influence government policy, specifically on environmental issues.
Yes, Prince Charles, yes. He writes letters to various government ministers, saying what he would like to happen about certain issues and things.
Equality Act exemption.
It was also a moment of change, a moment of difference and diversity for the royal family, from the guests to the performers to the service.
Another sensible law the royals are bafflingly exempt from is the Equality Act. In 2010, this law came into force to protect people from discrimination. This included the Equal Pay Act, laws about racial and sexual discrimination, and about disability and religious discrimination too.
The talk of the town was the two royals named in this racism row which has been bubbling on for quite a while.
It's to ensure that Brits are all treated equally under the law. However, the royal family doesn't have to go along with it. People of colour were actually banned from doing certain jobs in the royal households until the 1960s, well into the Queen's reign.
Often with the royals, the Queen's old adage, never complain, never explain. They kind of bury their heads in the sand with this.
We don't know exactly how diverse Buckingham Palace's staff roster is today because it's never been made public, and palace officials say they aren't keeping track.
In a wide-ranging interview on CBS, she also spoke of conversations in the household about how dark their unborn son Archie's skin might be.
But in 2021, when allegations of racism began to fly, there was no way for the Equality and Human Rights Commission to investigate because of the exemptions. It's been suggested many times that the palace ought to abide by the Equality Act, if not by changing the law, then at least by choice. And all that's been said is that the palace is considering doing so.
If the Meghan-Harry tea spilling has revealed anything, it's the obvious racism that exists at the top of the so-called royalist ticket.
No taxes. With the Queen's death in 2022, a lot of people suddenly became very interested in the question of inheritance tax.
They are exempt from most of the taxes we all pay, and there are now calls for that to change.
How much money did the Queen actually have, and would the King have to pay the inheritance tax on it to the government? The answer was no, because the monarch is exempt from paying any and all taxes, including inheritance tax.
This would be a brilliant time for the monarch to say, I'm going to be open and I want to be treated as fairly as anybody.
This isn't the whole story though, because the King and Prince William do voluntarily pay income tax, though we have no idea how much because it isn't reported.
It is public money, it's taxpayers' money. Your money, it's my money, it's the viewers' money.
But if he changed his mind and decided he didn't want to do it anymore, there would be no way to make him. It's also only income from certain sources that is subject to income tax too.
In 2025, they will receive £132 million of public money from the sovereign grant to pay for their official duties and royal residences.
Much of the King's income comes from taxpayers in the first place though. Tens of millions of pounds each year goes to the royal family via the sovereign grant, though apparently that still wasn't enough in 2023 because they spent over £20 million more than the grant gave them. They spent a fortune on the coronation and the ongoing renovations of Buckingham Palace.
The King and Prince William also have private sources of wealth, including 2 extensive land estates.
No speed limits.
When you see the pictures of what happened to Prince Philip's car this afternoon, you are left wondering quite how he managed to avoid going to hospital today.
Not only does the sovereign not require an actual driving licence or a passport, but royals also don't have to abide by the speed limits. Not all the time, anyway.
The Land Rover he was driving was rolled upright and taken away this evening, but it was a crash which eyewitnesses say, perhaps not surprisingly, left the 97-year-old very shocked and shaken.
While out and about on royal duties, their drivers are always police officers, which means that, like any other emergency service vehicle, they're allowed to break the speed limit if it's deemed necessary to do so.
That the Duke of Edinburgh, at 97, is still driving himself around the Sandringham estate, we should not be surprised.
This doesn't count if they're just driving themselves around, but it does mean that they can order their drivers to break the speed limit. However, from time to time, royals have been involved in road accidents.
No eyewitness saw yesterday's accident unfold as clearly as Roy Warne. He had no idea one of the drivers was the Queen's husband.
Princess Anne was once hit with a £400 fine for driving 23 miles an hour over the speed limit, while Prince Philip ended up in a car accident in 2019. Philip's Land Rover overturned after colliding with a Kia.
And after checking the passengers of that car, Roy next went to the Duke of Edinburgh's on its side.
Shockingly, one of the victims, Emma Fairweather, said that the Duke initially refused to apologise. She also broke her wrist and there was a baby in the car. He was 97 at the time. After this incident, the Queen decided to completely stop driving. Sovereign immunity.
The English Bull Terrier has been given a reprieve after the Princess's lawyers argued that a reenactment at Windsor Castle showed the dog was excitable and not aggressive.
The Princess Royal is one of the few royals who has had criminal action taken against her, and not only for that speeding offence.
It was alleged that Princess Anne's dog bit 2 children aged 7 and 12 as they took a walk in Windsor Great Park near the Queen's residence.
In 2002, she was fined £500 after one of her dogs attacked 2 children, with many claiming that it was likely that the dog would have been destroyed had it been owned by an ordinary person and behaved like that.
In court, Princess Anne only spoke to confirm her name and plead guilty to a charge of having an uncontrollable dog.
Elsewhere, Prince Andrew completely refused to cooperate with FBI investigations into his associations with Jeffrey Epstein. But if the actual monarch was involved with incidents like these, there would be no way of even trying to bring charges, because they have complete immunity from prosecution.
We were compiling a case against him, but it wasn't until he went through his interview that our client, Virginia, decided that she was going to go after him.
It is legally impossible for the king to break the law. No matter what he does, he simply won't be liable.
We ended up sending Prince Andrew's lawyers a letter offering to talk to them. He ignored it, which was probably one of his biggest mistakes, besides the interview, and then we sued him.
Charges could be brought against the sovereign, however, if they give their permission to be charged, though the government could pass a law to restrict this. It's never really been tested, however, because the sovereigns have traditionally followed the law anyway, despite all those freedoms.
It was reported that he wanted his day in court. It would have been a very silly move, because it would have opened him up to all sorts of questioning.
Freeholds.
Tonight, what Charles and William aren't telling you about their secret millions.
It isn't just via the sovereign grant that the royals get access to public money. The royals own hundreds of thousands of acres of land, with a property portfolio worth billions. much of it freehold.
Their private estates, the duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall, make Charles and William £50 million a year.
This means that people up and down the country pay ground rent to the royal family directly because of the UK's archaic leasehold and freehold system, which means that even if you own a house, you may not own the ground it is built on and will still have to pay rent to an aristocratic landowner.
Thousands of documents obtained by dispatches reveal how hard up government departments, schools, and even the NHS are helping to keep the cash rolling in for Charles and William.
But more shocking than that, lots of the land owned by the royals is occupied by public infrastructure, like hospitals. This means that publicly funded NHS hospitals are paying millions of pounds each year in ground rent, primarily to King Charles and the Prince of Wales.
The Duchy charged the Fire Brigade £612,000 to lease the land.
In 2024, it came out that tenants in the Duchy of Cornwall, homes owned by Prince William now, are living in squalor, with some properties subject to black mould. Many of the buildings are extremely old and in desperate need of renovations that haven't been carried out.
And Charles even made money from Poundbury's deceased, as he charged Dorchester Town Council a one-off payment for the local cemetery.
Let us know in the comments whether you think the royal family should stay or go.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for paying your rent every now and then.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out this other recent clip from WatchMojoUK and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.